Member for Surrey Panorama.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is my pleasure today to rise and speak on this motion. And it's been interesting sitting here listening to the debate from both sides of the House. And I do want to say that when we did first come to BC, the place we moved to was Nanaimo. And I can tell you in those days, Nanaimo was definitely a forestry-focused town, that most of the jobs that existed there came from around the mills. And I can also tell you that when I was on the BC Teachers Federation Executive, I had the pleasure to travel around the province, and I saw the impact of our vibrant forestry sector. But I can also tell you, Minister, that as time went by and I revisited many of those places, what used to be vibrant villages, towns, centres were no longer that vibrant. I visited communities in North Island, visited communities in the interior, and recently had the pleasure to visit Mackenzie and some of the places in the interior who are really suffering as a result of what has happened in the forestry sector. And listening to our colleagues across the way, you would think that it all started yesterday or the day the NDP got elected. And we know that's not how it works. But before I actually go into that, Mr. Speaker, I also want to share with you some of the stories my constituents tell me about what the forestry sector added to their lives. As we all know, many of the people who came from the Indian subcontinent ended up working in the mills in the early days. And I have a very dear friend who tells me how their accommodation was so bad that they had to keep the fire going all the time. And it was an open fire in their shed that they called home. And often they would light fires outside in the snow as well, just to get that extra heat from the outside as well. And we know that those from the South Asian community have played a critical role in our forest industry. And I would invite members who are not aware of those contributions to visit the museum. And there are wonderful exhibits there telling the stories of the hard work done by those communities. But I can tell you that many who retired from the forestry sector retired on good pensions, had decent paying jobs, were able to send their children to school. And those children are now our doctors and engineers and nurses and electricians and plumbers. And all of that was due to the jobs they had in the forestry sector. And I think that for them, they hold the forestry sector close to their hearts because of that. But we know now today that that is not so for many people. Yes, the families that came out last week are feeling the pain of what has been happening to the forestry sector over the last couple of decades. And we also know that under the previous government, over 30,000 forestry jobs were lost. And there was permanent closure of dozens of mills. And that's their record. And that's why it was so amazing to me that here in the House today, listening to the debate, you would think they have been the biggest champions of the forest sector that Parliament has ever seen. And we know from their track record that is not so. Mr. Speaker, over the number of years I've spoken both here and in a different House about our natural resources, how we need to use our natural resources to grow good-paying jobs right here in British Columbia for our children. Because when we ship our natural resources overseas, what we are shipping overseas is our children's future as well. Those decent-paying jobs, the value-added jobs, disappear with that as well. And that is one of the things that happened under the previous government, that there was a huge escalation, almost like a hockey stick, escalation of raw logs being shipped overseas. And that's not just imagine.
Thank you, member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.